we're going to talk about thesis writing. I know last class I actually said we're going to start structuring our writing, but I think this actually is a prerequisite to knowing how to structure your writing in your opinion pieces. And we're going to look at why today through theses. So does anyone know what a thesis is? You can type it into the chat or just unmute yourself. No one? All right. Okay, so we'll learn about that today. Oh, someone said a presentation of your opinion in the form of a sentence. Someone also said that. Serena says it is a sentence that basically summarizes your essay. Yeah, so all of y'all are right in some sense. It doesn't necessarily need to be the opinion, because sometimes you'll see in like college research papers, a lot of theses will be just summing it up. It doesn't have to be opinion, but a good opinion, a good thesis statement, as we'll see today, will have some kind of opinion in it. So all of y'all are right. It's a sentence or two that condenses the argument made in the writing. Doesn't necessarily have to be an essay. It doesn't have to be a research paper. It's just any writing makes sense. We will also see today that you won't need a thesis to put in your opinion piece. You don't need to put in the introduction or even in the middle in the body paragraph, as you would normally do when you write an essay. Especially in opinion pieces, writers will follow the structure of a thesis, but implement those structures throughout their writing pieces. So they won't have an explicit sentence that says, this is what I'm arguing and these are the reasons why. Instead, they will use it to either brainstorm their ideas for their body paragraphs or implement it throughout each body paragraph, like each part of the thesis throughout their body paragraph. So that brings me to my question. Why write a thesis if you don't have to put it in every single introduction, if you don't have to put it into every editorial that you write? So there are a plethora of reasons why, but there are three main reasons as to why it is significant to opinion journalism more specifically. So one is to test the strength of your ideas by refining them into a sentence or two. When you are challenged with condensing all of your ideas into one or two sentences, you have to think about which arguments are worth talking about, which arguments can logically flow after the other, in terms of like listing them out in the thesis. Two, to better organize, develop, and structure your arguments. So this is what I was talking about with how some opinions writers, they use the parts of a thesis to start off each body paragraph. They organize their writing as they would when they're writing a thesis. And it makes logical sense because your thesis would make logical sense. And as I was saying, you know, they use the thesis to make bullet points or brainstorm what their body paragraph topic sentence is going to be. And three is to provide the reader with a quote unquote guide to your writing. And what I mean by this is to give the reader an insight into what your writing is going to be about. So a lot of people, when they're reading something online, like a news story or something, they'll look at the first few paragraphs and think about whether or not it's worth reading. And this is what the reader is going to determine what your writing is going to be about in a very concise way. So we're going to talk about the components of a strong thesis. Oh, sorry, I gotta go back. Oh no. Yeah. So here are the components of a strong thesis. There is no exact formula for a strong thesis because it is also a form of creative expression, but here are some bullet points. So first, it's a personal or subjective take on a subject or topic that people could disagree on. It needs to have a main idea. I say a main idea, singular, because if it's too many main ideas, it's not a centralized argument. You want to have one main idea that the reader can identify. You also want to have conclusions about a subject or topic based on evidence. We'll look at the evidence part in a later class, i.e. how to conduct research and most importantly, relevant research to your thesis claim. But a strong thesis needs to take a stance and avoids language like it seems. So someone messaged the chat. Oh, for some reason my voice isn't pretty clear. Okay, hold on. Give me a second, I will fix this issue.
Can everyone hear me okay now?
Yeah, it's much more clear.
Okay, thank you for letting me know, by the way. Okay, so here are the components of a strong thesis. As I was saying, you need to have conclusions about a subject or topic based on evidence. This means taking a stance and avoiding language like it seems. Along with it seems, you want to avoid words like I. Don't get me wrong, there are definitely strong opinion pieces that have been published in well-known newspapers and magazines that use I, especially columns. But things like I believe, I think, it seems, makes your argument less valid and conveys to the reader that it's not a definite take, that it's something very personal and subjective, and that's not something you want to convey in a strong thesis. You want to make it seem like your argument is the most objective and is the only way you can think about that topic. And also, what conclusions mean is that you want to have an opinion about something. It's very easy to talk about a subject, especially things that you may believe are definitely wrong, like racism, and not know how to convey opinions. Next, it should be argumentative, not descriptive. Similar to what I was talking about with conclusions, a strong thesis needs to justify discussion. It needs to be a talking point. It needs to be able to be refutable. Of course, you want to have strong evidence to back up that thesis that would make your thesis non-refutable, as it would seem, but there are definitely going to be people out there who disagree. And the last thing of a strong thesis is that it needs to be specific. So this could mean being specific in terms of narrowing the topic, or it could be specific in terms of the language that you use. So you don't want to use vague terms. And we'll look at that in an example. But first, we're going to look at how theses are used in opinion pieces. And there are different ways that it's been used. So the first one, we won't read it, but as you can see from the title, it's Why Teachers Support Fully Remote Learning. I'm not sure how many of y'all went back to school today, but in New York, today was the first day of school, and this was published in the summer as people were deciding whether or not students should be going back to school, having a blended learning kind of model, or fully remote. And in this article, the writer chose to make this very clear. So they've listed out reasons as to why their thesis is true, but they start their beginning paragraph with the thesis in it. Does anyone want to read the first paragraph? Yeah, Serena, go ahead.
This is a simple letter making a simple point. Blending learning is no good for high school. Many parents and students have the belief that blended offers some sort of attractive halfway point between the danger of full reopening and stripped down experience of remote instruction. Unfortunately, the blended model is the worst of all worlds, not only exposing the community to risk, but also discarding the unique programming characteristics of our school. These are 4 reasons why the blended model is a worse choice.
Thank you, that was great. So this author chose to put the thesis right in the first paragraph, and like these little body paragraphs or under these numbered headings: help/safety, damage to the program, not true socializations. These are referencing the unique programming characteristics of our school. I'm not sure how many of y'all were able to identify this, but this whole thing is the thesis right here. This whole thing is a thesis. It's 2 sentences. You can argue that the second sentence is the thesis, but many people choose to have a sentence before that explaining where their refutation comes from, where their thesis developed, and that's where they develop was the students and parents that have that kind of belief. Okay, and on this article, so we have a writer who chose to not add the thesis in the beginning few paragraphs. Instead, she took more of a personalized approach. As you can see, she says, I chose not to repost my friend's stories, opting to like the mention instead. And personally, I. Normally, we would advise against using I in thesis statements, but opinion pieces are very versatile. This person chose to add personal voice, and that's okay. But we'll see in this paragraph over here that in the thesis, she doesn't use any form of personalized language or any objective, any language that would denote subjective beliefs. Would anyone like to read this paragraph over here?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Social media is not the only way to promote the movement. BLM is more than a series of chain posts in a feed full of black screens. Sure, the chain post shows that people care, and the black screens are useful for blocking people from seeing information under the hashtag All Lives Matter or hashtag Blue Lives Matter. But shaming people for not posting is pointless. By pressuring people into posting when they did not have the initiative to do so, the movement becomes performative, with people, quote, hoping on the wave, unquote, in order to avoid shaming again instead of posting because they genuinely believe in the movement.
Thank you. It's good. So this article is about the Black Lives Matter movement and why it should not be a social media trend. This writer chose to add her thesis right in the middle of the writing. As you can see, it is the middle of the writing. This is a thesis, if you didn't catch on. She talks about how we shouldn't shame people for not posting on social media of Black Lives Matter related things, because if they didn't want to do so in the first place and they do post on social media, it becomes performative. And then in this latter part, after the comma, she explains what that means. And in the latter two paragraphs, she elaborates more on this latter part over here. And then you have an article like this. This is about homelessness and the COVID-19, a brutal reality. this article actually doesn't have a thesis. Instead, this writer chose to take parts of the thesis, separate it, and have each paragraph be part of their thesis. So, as y'all have seen in the first example, someone messaged me, what does hopping on the wave mean? It's just a figure of saying that just means going along with the trend, going on the movement. That's all it means. It's like treating Black Lives Matter as a trend. That's what the writer was referring to. Okay, so anyways, back onto this. As y'all have seen in the first example, some writers choose to have a sentence right before their argumentative sentence, part of the thesis, explaining where they got their thesis from and the background behind that. This is what this entire paragraph is referring to. They're talking about immunocompromised individuals and the COVID-19 pandemic. They're introducing it to their writing, and talking about what homeless shelters have been through. In this next paragraph, I won't read it, but they talk about the conditions in those homeless shelters. Things like downsizing, as well as the difficulty to maintain, to meet those guidelines of homeless shelters under this pandemic. And here's where they start to get argumentative and not just descriptive. Instead of giving an outright thesis claim, all the following paragraphs talk about how hard it is for the staff in those homeless shelters to meet the demands that the homeless population needs in like basic necessities, as well as the need to self-quarantine. I will post this article later if y'all want to give it a read, because I do think this is the most commonly used form of thesis introduction in opinion journalism. Of course, there are writers who outright state their thesis, but we've seen in how opinion journalism has evolved, the latter is probably the most common. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how to write a thesis. So step one is to brainstorm a topic or general subject. So we have sugar consumption. I'll just use sugar consumption as an example right now, and we'll build a thesis from there. So sugar consumption, that's all we have now. The reader does not know yet what it is that you want to say about sugar consumption, but that's the main idea. And there's only one main idea. Next, step two is to narrow the topic. So now we have reducing sugar consumption in elementary school children. So there's two ways we've narrowed this. One is, what about sugar consumption? Are we increasing it? Are we reducing it? Are we reporting it every single day? What is it that we're doing with sugar consumption? And we chose reducing it. We've also narrowed it in the second way, which is in terms of population. So now your thesis is refined to a particular population that can be studied and focused on with more precision. So it'd be really hard to talk about sugar consumption in the general population, because diets for adults and the elderly and children are very different. It's a very broad age range, and many diseases come along with age that would be factored into those studies. And elementary school children is a more precise population to focus on. And this topic, or this little fragment of a sentence right here, it also takes a stance on something that not everyone would agree on. So I'm sure many people would agree that we should increase sugar consumption, particularly elementary school students who might say, I love sugar, I want more sugar. The only thing missing in this little fragment right here is a conclusion on the topic, because you don't really know much about what it is, Why do we need to reduce sugar consumption? Why in elementary school students? There's a lot of questions that aren't answered by this alone. Oops, I skipped something. My bad. Okay, so step 3 is to take a position. This is where the conclusion part comes in. There's actually 2 parts to the conclusion part. So now, after we could take a position on the topic, we have more attention should be paid to the food and beverage choices available to elementary school children. So while the sentence is very vague, the sentence does a good job in asserting a specific stance on sugar consumption. And I say specific because we've changed sugar consumption to food and beverage choices, because that's where the sugar consumption mainly comes from. And we should talk about more attention. So it's not just that we should reduce it, but we should pay more attention to it. It's something that should be of utmost a priority. And most times you know that you've taken a position on the topic when you have a coherent sentence. So like before, reducing sugar consumption in an elementary school student wasn't a sentence, but we should reduce sugar consumption in elementary school children is a sentence, although that is also very vague. So yeah, you've taken a position on the topic. Now, how do we fix this vagueness? We go to step 4, which is using specific language. And now we have experts estimate that half of elementary school children consume 9 times the recommended daily allowance of sugar. Now, this is a pretty specific sentence. We've changed out a lot of words to other things. So this sentence mitigates vague terms like more attention and food and beverage choices that we had in step 3, and we've replaced it. However, the sentence is not a thesis because it lacks assertion. This doesn't have the conclusion that we took in step 3. Instead, it merely reports a statistic on where you got this information from, where you came to this belief. Okay, this leads us to our last step, which is step 5. We need to make an assertion based on clearly stated support. This is using the statistic we used in step 4 and combining that with the conclusion. Now we have, because half of all American elementary school children consume 9 times the recommended daily allowance of sugar, schools should be required to replace the beverages and soda machines with healthy alternatives. So we've noticed how we've taken out food and beverage choices because that is very vague, and now we have beverages and soda machines, basically soda, what's dispensed in vending machines. And we've also have the kind of topic here, the recommended daily allowance of sugar, that speaks to sugar consumption. Now this is a thesis. It combines everything from our past 4 steps to answer the questions, what should be done to reduce sugar consumption in children, or more specifically, elementary school students, and who should do it. As you can see, when we started out with our first topic in step 1 of sugar consumption, we didn't have these questions to answer. We didn't have these questions to guide us because we didn't know what we were arguing yet. But this kind of speaks to the point that theses change to reflect new insights. And this reflects back to our first point on the components or reasons to write a thesis, which was that it's to test the strength of your argument. So this is what we mean by it can change. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions up to this point? Okay, we'll move forward. So next we'll look at bad and better theses. So the first one, using the internet has a positive effect on people. So positive effect, as you can tell, is very vague. We don't know what positive effect is, but this is a better thesis. The internet improves lives by instantly connecting people across the world, creating new friendships, and serving as a form of exchanging ideas. The reason why I say this is better and not necessarily a good thesis is because people is also a very broad population. People is like everyone, basically. If I were writing this thesis, I would change it to a particular population. Maybe if I wanted to study the use of the internet in high school or, yeah, in adolescence. And I also think internet is a very vague term. I would also change this to something like social media. Yeah. And another bad example is the government has the right to limit free speech. Now, whether you believe this or not, this is very straightforward. It definitely denotes a conclusion, it denotes an opinion, but it doesn't denote reason and rational contemplation, as before we had statistics to combine with our thesis on sugar consumption. There's not much to this. There's not much substance. Now, a better thesis is the government has the right to limit free speech in cases of overtly racist or sexist language because our failure to address such abuses would effectively suggest that our society condones such ignorant and hateful values. So, this is a better thesis because it elaborates on this. It's the same up to after limit free speech. And then it specifies this, in which cases this is okay. And also anything that uses because is a great sign because it means you're elaborating. Yeah. And I'll move on. So there are some templates that you can use to create effective and strong theses. So here is one example. There are definitely a lot more. However, this is one template that you can use for comparison and contrast theses. A lot of these can come from when you're like comparing and contrasting time periods where, say, racism hasn't changed, like the civil rights movement to the Black Lives Matter movement. That's one example in which I would use this template. Now, this template isn't to write a thesis. This is a thesis helper to help you organize your thoughts before you write about your thesis. So you talk about, you can say the either differences or similarities between blank and blank are adjective, and you say a verb, adjective, and then noun. So when you fill this in, it would be the differences between college and high school are pronounced, and they deserve thorough investigation. And then you would write another sentence after this that talk about why they deserve thorough investigation and what differences in particular that you're talking about. If you were talking about something like racism and the Black Lives Matter movement, you can say, the similarities between the Black Lives Matter movement and the civil rights movement are striking, and they deserve thorough investigation. You can even end it with, continue it with a because. They shed light on the systemic issue of systemic racism in our modern society, or under the Trump administration, something like that. As you can see, this is not just to write a thesis, this is a template to help you organize your thoughts. And there are more templates for comparison and contrast. So the bold is something that's already there, like part of the template, and where it's not bold is where you would fill it in with either an adjective or a noun. So although they bear, and then you would fill in some superficial similarities, the differences between Athens and Sparta are clear. Or you can say, while some differences between Japan and the United States are evident, the similarities are salient. And once again, you would elaborate on these. Okay, so now it is your turn. So I messaged I posted a Google Classroom announcement earlier, telling y'all to come with a topic or a subject that you're passionate about so we can talk about it, or for workshopping your thesis. If you didn't see this before the class, that's okay. You can take some time to do that. Oh, someone asked, what does salient mean? Salient is just of denoting significance. It's very noticeable and also important. Who is drawing on the screen? So when you talk about the similarities between Japan and the United States, you can say, you can easily replace that with important. Who is drawing on the screen? All right, well, I guess I'm gonna have to erase this. I'm sorry, y'all. Ooh, okay. Okay, so since we're a little bit ahead of schedule, I was going to have y'all submit a thesis onto Google Classroom by next week, but we can workshop it together here. So you can message me privately or in the chat a topic that you're going to write about. And this doesn't have to be just a topic that you want to focus on now, but it will also be used for further classes when you actually work on writing. Someone said, I don't see the assignment in Google Classroom. Yeah, I haven't posted, but I will after this class, along with the slides or the PowerPoint from today. Someone says Greek mythology. Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. So now you have to refine it though. What exactly about Greek mythology do you want to talk about? Because there's a wide variety of cases in which Greek mythology intersects with everything we do today. Like, you can talk about the ethics of Greek mythology. You can talk about reading Greek mythology in school, things like that. And someone says, I would like to talk about war. Is there a particular war that you want to talk about, or do you want to talk about the idea of waging war with other countries itself and take kind of a global peace kind of perspective? Okay, the two world wars. Do you mean comparing and contrasting, or? All right, so they said the difference between Zeus and Poseidon. Okay. Is there anything you want to say about those differences? Greek and Roman mythology is also a good one. Okay, so y'all can take the time right now to write your own thesis. I will, and similarities. Okay, I will make the assignment on Google Classroom. I'll post it as y'all are working on this. If you need any help, just let me know. And you definitely want to refine it. So Sophie said, parents should not help students on homework. It will defeat the entire purpose of schoolwork. Okay, I definitely see your stance there. I think one thing that will refine it is the entire purpose of schoolwork. You should be a little bit more specific on what that means. So you can say something like, parents should not help students on homework as it is an educational activity supplemental to their classwork. It defeats the entire purpose of having additional practice. That's something you can say. I'm going to go back to this this components of a strong thesis page. Y'all can work on your theses and reference this slide. And I'm going to post the Google Classroom assignment right now. And within the next week, you should check on Google Classroom for any comments that I made on your writing, or not on your writing, but just on the assignment, because I will help edit and workshop your thesis. And that will all be done by next week before Wednesday's class. Okay. So Zoe says Greek mythology only. Is there anything you want to talk about Greek mythology? Because one of the classmates talked about the differences between Zeus and Poseidon. Is there anything you want to say about Greek mythology? Okay, I posted the thesis workshop assignment that you should turn in your thesis to. Either you can do it by the end of today if you have it done by the end of today's class, or you can turn it in later. I set the due date to next Monday. So by Monday midnight, you should have submitted a thesis onto the Google Classroom, and by Wednesday's class time, I will have responded to all of them and given y'all feedback so that we can workshop them some more and start writing your editorials. Okay, so Zoe says the gods and heroes of Greek mythology. Are there specific gods and heroes that you want to talk about? Is there something about the gods and heroes that you want to talk about? Jonathan says electronic payment is better than physical payment. Okay, that's a very strong take and pretty controversial to some people. I mean, I'm glad that you're opinionated and that shows in the statement. I think to improve on this little statement or sentence is adding a because. I think that'd be a lot better. And also you should refer to the time period, i.e. in an increasingly or technologically advanced society. I think you should also reference maybe in another sentence or something about the backlash and what that means for people in low-income communities or something like that. Okay, so Zoe says no. You don't want to talk about anything about the gods and heroes. Okay, so if you don't want to write about anything pertaining the differences between them. Okay, that's also great. So someone says they don't see the slide. Can everyone else see them?
Yes.
Okay.
Might be Wi-Fi issues or something.
Yeah, maybe. Okay. So if everyone is clear on the assignment, and no one else has any more questions or want any live feedback, I can end the class for today and y'all are free to go. If you do have any questions, you can always reach out on Google Classroom or you can email me. I'd be glad to help. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording.